Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hello, this is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles in the USA. And now a word from our sponsor. Oh, that's me. Through our winery, Centralis Wine, we sponsor this podcast. If you want to learn more about Centralis Wine, go to centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. My guest for this episode is Ellen Cavalli. Ellen is the co-apple grower, gleaner, forager, cidermaker, and owner of Tilted Shed Cider Works in Sonoma, California, or Windsor. She has a past career in publishing and continues to have a hand in the zine called Malus. That's Malus, like apples, you know. And I just discovered Malus, and I love it. It does in text what I try to do with audio, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. At 10 years in the business, Tilted Shed has achieved OG status in the West Coast new wave of cider, and this conversation with Ellen is about to show you why. Ellen is as entertaining as she is insightful, and the laughs and pearls of wisdom continue in rapid fire throughout this entire uncensored and unedited conversation. This is natural podcasting at its best, with zero intervention, so you get the full undisgorged flavor of this scintillating scion of cider, this oracle from the orchard, this diva of dry farm deliciousness. I'll say no more so that you can get on with the show. Enjoy.
I'll do my best, and if this sucks, drop it. Drop it. I see I'm recording in progress. I see this happening. You thought you could be record. So sneaky. All right.
Ellen, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Hi, Adam.
Thanks for joining me. I can cut out the first, 30 seconds there.
No, this is going to be our best spot right now. We're doing like a stand-up comedy show online. Ellen and Adam, let's go. Okay.
I wish I had started before you started talking about how about them apples, though. That would have been a good soundbite to catch.
Yeah, well, don't name this podcast How About Them Apples. Don't do it.
Shed,
you know what else?
Tilted Shed Cider Works. How about them?
How about Cider House Rules? How about not? Let's have some creativity. Jesus. Anyway.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, just the state of journalism around cider. Man, it's true though. We were just saying there's a lot of the people that we're relying on to tell our story don't know anything about what we're doing. Like they really don't know the ins and outs or the hows and wherefores. And then you're getting Cider House Rules.
Yeah.
Articles.
Well, I mean, I started a zine, right? Do you know this?
Did
I don't know
you?
how much
No, tell me.
Okay.
So consider that I know nothing.
This whole podcast, you're going to need to really edit this because it's going in it's not even starting off like a normal podcast, but why would it? It's me.
Right.
Yes. So, I mean, I come from a publishing background, magazines, books, nonfiction, right? That is my background, 25 years doing that. And I started out in the zine world back in San Francisco in the mid-90s. And, a lot of times, and this happens with cider, and it can happen with any sort of category or interest, right? Is somebody else sets the narrative. Somebody else is in charge of the messaging, who controls the media, controls the message, right?
Yep.
And zines were a reaction against that, where we're like, I don't need to work with some New York publishing house that's, funded by some billionaires, and they're trying to sell advertising and XYZ. Reject that. And that's what I loved about it. It was a little bit raw. It's definitely kind of edgy and in some respects uncensored, but thoughtful. And I come from that background. And so, I'd been, I had moved to books over time, but I still always loved both the format, the print format, and the ethos of the zine world. And so after, I don't know, geez, it was, we started in 2011, Tilted Shed. And, as I'm saying, every single article was the exact same thing. And every single headline was the exact same thing. Oh, is it made out of, does it have alcohol? It,
God, I know.
is it
No,
always sweet? Can we, what would you pair it with? I'm just like, why do we have the three? And my least favorite. Oh, did you know that the founding fathers made cider? Did you know John Adams drank a tankard of cider every morning? Did you know that Thomas Jefferson had a cider orchard? And and not only are those tropes, first of all, extremely reductive and repetitive,
yeah.
but they're wrong. And you are, in a lot of ways, especially with this founding fathers colonialism background, you're perpetuating, this patriarchy, this white colonial patriarchy from the 1700s, when I, as a woman, wouldn't have any rights during that time. Do you think I want to look back at that time as the halcyon era of cider?
Right.
No. Do you think Black people want to look back at that time as the halcyon era of cider? No. You
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah.
why are the
Yeah.
white men with this colonial perspective creating the narrative about cider when cider as a whole is actually a very, egalitarian thing? We have probably half and half women and men drinking cider, making cider, involved in the production and marketing of it. So why are we keep telling these stories about these dudes in old wigs who are enslaving people, and subjugating women? Why?
I totally agree.
Erasing the natives populations. Why are we doing that? So I just got
Yep.
really tired of it. And as you can tell, Adam, I still am. Um,
Totally. And it's funny, you're not alone. I mean, I'm right there with you, but I didn't have this experience of being a cider maker 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And I mean, some would argue it's still tough today, but wouldn't you say that things are getting a bit better in terms of explaining? Like, you don't quite have to explain as much anymore when you're talking about cider, or do you disagree? Do you think it's still just as hard?
well, I don't explain. So a lot of that is
Right.
choice, right?
Right.
So I can choose to respond to those questions, or I can pretty much ignore them. And I've chosen to ignore them. Or turn it on its head. So as I was saying, I come from the zine background, and that informs
Right.
a lot about how I approach storytelling, messaging, telling people about truth and about perspectives of different, maybe things that are undervalued, underlooked, underappreciated. So in 2018, I started my own little zine called Malus. It's a print quarterly, it's still out there. And we started doing articles on, like, what? Let's talk about the enslaved people who made Thomas Jefferson cider. Let's talk about women in the cider industry. Let's talk about these issues, Native Americans, and what happened in the land displacement, and that, the cider community was part of that and is trying to, address that, rectify it, and be part of reparations. And I know you talked to Steve at South Hill and got into a little bit about that. Or,
Yeah.
we talk about wildly different things. Like, let's talk about seedlings, apples, and why we should go into foraging. And let's talk about, regenerative agriculture, and all sorts of topics. And then also just super geeky stuff like, why are red fleshed apples red, and why is that cool? So, it's all over the board. And I think what I'm trying to say is, we have a choice to create the narrative we want as well. So yeah, I can complain
Yeah.
about it all day long, and I will. But I also am just like, then change it. Then change
Yeah.
it. So when I get people asking me those questions, I pretty much don't answer it anymore. I go like, no. You know what I mean? I'm not going to,
Yeah.
I'm not going to go
Yeah.
back and talk about the history of cider and why they should be respected because it's part of American heritage. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk
Yeah.
about it as it is now.
Yeah.
What is it impact on the community, on the environment, on agriculture? How does it bring pleasure? How do you combine pleasure and principle? Let's talk about the current topics. Yes, the things in the past happened in the past, but if I want to go forward, I can't stay there. So I set that narrative forward. So no, if people come to me and ask, remedial questions, I'll give them a very quick remedial answer. And then I'm going to challenge them with something new. Or we're just going to say, like, what do you think? How does it taste? Da, 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 da. Like, let's connect on those levels. And then with Malus, I'm no longer the editor. My friend Darlene Hayes is the editor, but I'm still involved. That's where we also sort of like challenge people to think deeper, challenge them to think broader.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what, cider at this moment is doing. So going back to your question, I'm trying to remember, but what happened, 10 years ago and have things changed? Yes, they've changed. They definitely have. There's been definitely, a gradual improvement or elevation in cider IQ.
Yeah.
Um, but that what's also been happening is there's been a fluidity and a an expansion in the interests of cider by other people. For example, wine people. So, when I started, there was no, how to explain it. It was just like you're either beer or cider or wine.
Right.
And there were, just a handful of producers in cider, and you're knocking it out, and wine is the enemy and beer is the enemy because we're all fighting over this little tiny shelf space. I mean, for cider, just a meager little shelf space, and you're fighting to get recognized by the media beyond apple seasons because it's always harvest season, and that's the only one time anybody wants to talk about cider. And so, we were just sort of elbowing it out. And then within the cider community, we're elbowing it out and trying to, differentiate ourselves from each other. And what I've been finding over the years is I'm not looking at another alcohol category as my competitor. I'm finding so much crossover and coalescence with other makers that I
Right.
think it's super liberating and exciting. And they've been adding and enhancing the experience of cider. We do co-ferments as well. We're friends with winemakers, and there's been a lot of overlap and generosity.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is changing. And that is what I try to hold on to. Right. So I was being interviewed for one of those like a magazine that you're talking about, where it's a very that no one knows anything about cider, and they just somehow got in touch with me and wanted to talk about it, and they're asking me these like larger issues. And I wasn't going to go and default to like, yes, this cider, semi-dry cider tastes good with goat cheese. I wasn't going to I wasn't going to lapse into it. I wanted to challenge. I wanted to broaden their horizons and talk about, how exciting it is right now. Where, we don't have to be dogmatic about it, or we don't have to. So I've been really excited about just the last maybe couple of years seeing cider makers, and us among them, who were very much like, only apples. Everything else is inferior. You know what I mean? Because you had to
Yeah.
be that way. You had to champion apples because no one else was going to. I live in a
Yeah.
place here where people bulldoze orchards on the regular to plant vineyard. You see these
Right.
100-year-old beautiful organic orchards that have been there and have gone through so much. They weather all the droughts, fire, flood, you name it. And then someone comes in, bulldozes it down, and puts it in a vanity Pinot, like another vanity Pinot vineyard. So if I don't champion these apples, who's going to? And if I don't show that they can make something beautiful, who's going to? So there's a very, deep obligation to apples. So for so long, I was the apple person, and I thought I was like, no beer, wine, I know a few winemakers, you're nice and everything, but that's not where it is. But I feel like my championing of apples, can also come with an expansion of our community. And so there's a lot of natural winemakers here in Northern California, here in Sonoma County, who at first, maybe dabbled in apples because their red grapes were a loss because of smoke taint, right? So that's a real big
Yeah.
problem, or because they had a loss of crop due to drought. I mean, we're in climate change,
Central.
anxiety up here. We're dealing with
Yeah.
a lot up here. And so you have to be really nimble, and the apples are super resilient. And so they'll dabble in it just as an aside, just like, I better fill something out. And then they start getting excited about it too. They understand why these are beautiful. They understand why they're worth saving, that this is an extraordinary, fruit that can be transformed through the magic of fermentation into something that's beautiful and sublime that wine grapes can't do. Everything has, its own offering. So I've been really excited by why I see that maybe, some good friends of ours are doing, co-ferments. We do co-ferments now. We've been doing them for a few years. And I just think that is where I love to see cider going, where it transcends this like very specific category or shelving or demographic, and it's just really becomes people who love to explore their food shed, explore fruit, explore the dynamism that's here in our agriculture and our terroir, because that applies to everything we do. And that they really want to share the beauty of it with others. And that's where I see cider going, or at least that's the part of cider, and that's the narrative that I'm going with, And a lot of those folks, right? They tend to be a lot of women. They might be younger. They might be queer. They might be Black. You know what I mean? They are coming from
Yeah.
all different perspectives. And I think it's because we are all, and I'm an older white woman. Okay. But I'm still coming from a different life experience than maybe, the prototypical, cider maker from 10, 15 years ago that tended to be just a white man.
Yeah.
And, we're all bringing our different experiences, our different ethos into it. And I think it translates in what we're doing with cider, with co-ferments, and with wine. And that's how we're changing the narrative.
I love that. I mean, you've answered questions that I didn't even get a chance to ask yet.
keep going. I'll shut up for a second, Adam. We'll do it.
No, that's great. No, I really I love everything you said, and I love hearing your perspective on all that as well. I think it's really important to hear that, and to bring it up and discuss it, and to put it out there as just, yeah, like, I mean, I'm really excited about cider. I'm a huge cider proponent. I don't know if this is a good. I would love your reaction to this, but I've been saying, I don't think cider gets the respect that it should, and so my way of trying to put a little pin in somebody's mind about the kind of respect that I feel like it deserves is to say, like, it's America's champagne, like, and we should think of it that way. But do you think that's too, referential, Euro referential, or do you like that comparison?
Well, I do agree with you that cider doesn't get the respect it deserves. I mean, it really is a Rodney Dangerfield situation still. And I have found through the years, especially because I live here in wine country, that if a winemaker starts making cider, then the mainstream media, then the Psalms, then everybody really starts to perk up and notice. And
Yeah.
then, oh, what's Tilted Shed? And we're like, dudes, we've been here for 10 years and we've been doing this for a decade. And, you get Arkansas Black and Kingston Black confused. Like, come into, so it would be, and we've started working with grapes the past few years. And of course I drink wine and I have winemaker friends, but it's like, I'm the same way. I'm like, what's Tenturia grape? Because I just found a bunch, you know what I mean? Like, I'm learning all this stuff, and you have to come into it with a certain amount of humility.
Yeah.
You do learn a lot by working with a certain fruit year after year after year, by growing it as we do, by working with it. And so, in any case, I feel like a lot of times, yes, cider has not been given. How should I phrase it? Has it not been given the respect it deserves, or has it not earned the respect it deserves? I mean,
It's both. Probably both.
it's probably both, right? There are
It didn't.
people.
It wasn't until this century, I don't think, that where the Renaissance. I mean, there was just the odd person, and no, they might have been odd, but I meant, I mean, the random person who was doing a true, like, 750 milliliter bottled dry cider in that
Yeah,
in that style, and the rest was this sort of leftover mass produced dessert apple, like, concentrate.
right.
Angry, or not to badmouth any specific brands, but like
There are definitely mass market concentrate,
there you
industrial
go, yeah.
ciders for sure,
And that
tanker
was what
ciders, right?
people, I mean, if you went in anywhere and ordered a cider, that's what you got. And that, of course, does not deserve respect. It doesn't taste interesting. It doesn't taste good to me. And, and it's, there's nothing interesting really about that. There's no thoughtfulness given to what you guys are doing, for example. So
Right,
but then on the other hand, yeah, and I think it took, that not being the norm. I think it will continue to take that not being the norm, and more production of the type that you are doing to continue to elevate cider. And yeah, so I don't know that anybody's coming into this podcast. I'd be shocked if somebody's coming into this episode with a just no experience of a dry cider in the kind that you're making. But yeah, I think it's important to underline that difference, that it's like the difference between boxed, what is called Burgundy. You know what I
mm-hmm,
mean? Like
mm-hmm.
a box of Chablis that you can get at Ralph's, and a bottle of Chablis from France. That's the difference between one of these ciders that you would order at a bar. It comes in a little, 12-ounce bottle, versus what you guys are doing, for example.
Right,
And that's
but
important to underline, for anybody that
it is,
doesn't already
I
understand it.
always go, but so when that's true, right? That's absolutely true. But at the same time, I wonder how many I do actually listen to a lot of wine podcasts. I enjoy it. It's because I'm learning so many things at all time. Like, I just love to learn. I read wine
Yeah,
books
me
on
too.
wine because
Yeah.
I've read so many books and listened to so much on cider that I'm just like, okay, maybe I'll give myself a little break. I mean, I continually try to, improve my education, but still, it's good to learn about other things. And, not in one of those do I ever have, has anyone ever been asked, yeah, do you always have to make sure that the consumer knows that you're not a jug wine? Or
Right.
that, no, I mean,
True, true. Yeah.
I guess unless you're talking to someone about Riesling, that's the only thing people are, oh, Rieslings are sweet. And like, no, there's actually dry. Anyway, like, that's my only like analogy that I can think of off the top of my head. But on the whole, it's like when we talk about
Yeah.
wine,
Yeah.
we've
You're right.
I mean, maybe, I mean, unless you're talking about, the Judgment of Paris or Mondavi and Napa, and, bringing in the whatever, the different clones, and really working on terroir here versus, mass produced jug wine. I mean, I think that historically that was part of wine's conversation. And even now, I suppose, there is that talk, like you could talk about some of these like $2 chucks and all of the
Well,
stuff that's
and
low. I mean, but does that
that's what I was
come in,
just about to say, though.
so
I
it
mean, I
does
hear what
come
you're
up,
saying.
but
Yeah,
I'm
that's a good point.
But I don't know
go ahead.
how often when you're talking to a winemaker, do you have to bring up that part of the conversation? Like, oh, how are you different from Two Buck Chuck? And it's just like, so
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, as I said earlier, when people ask me those questions, I just
Right.
sort of like ignore them. I'm like, you don't have to answer. You don't talk to a beer maker all the time and ask them, if you're talking to some
True.
excellent craft brewer, Highland Park, right down in your area, or one of those folks,
Yeah.
when someone talks to them, they don't always have to talk about Budweiser. So why do I have to
True.
talk about all this other schluck? If it exists, big whoop. People like it. Good for
Yeah.
them. I don't
Yeah.
drink it. Fine. I'm not going after their demographic. I'm not going after their taps. It bothers me, sure, but a lot of stuff bothers me. That's not the only thing. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm just like, why do I always have to try to convince people to like it? Like
Yeah.
like, why do I have to convince to change people's minds? There are people who are already there. They're evolving. They've come on board. And like I said, it doesn't get respect unless a lot of times, unless unless a winemaker starts working in cider or bringing in apples with their co-ferments. That bothers me just from my ego. Do you know what I mean? That bothers me, like in that sort of super that like self-conscious way. That like, well, that's insulting to me. But for the good of cider, that's great. If they're bringing more people on board to look at cider in a different way, to regard it uh, as something that's lovely and beautiful, and we could talk about other issues rather than always having to compare and contrast to some like historical, antiquarian version of this product, or to some, mass market drac, then I'm all for it.
Totally. Yeah.
So,
I
in
Well, let
anything,
me.
yeah.
I drew a stark distinction, but I'll use wine now so that I think there's something to be said for the fact that I have good friends and they know I make wine, and yet I think I would need to sort of spell out for them the difference between what they can buy at Ralph's, that's a bottle of wine that looks like wine and drinks like wine and in every other way, has all the trappings of wine, but I would say is in a completely different category than, the people that I would bring on to talk about wine on this podcast, for example. Like
Right.
it's, where there is deep thought and intention and hands-on care, low intervention, stuff that's made,
Mhm.
from that place of agriculture, not from a place of recipes and mass production and everything that is, the Central Valley and, in mass, whatever. I think that's a little more subtle because it does look alike. It's labeled similarly. There is a distinction there, and I still think even in cider now, you're getting that distinction where there's a lot of I mean, especially in the canned cider world. Maybe not the 750 milliliter bottle cider world, but in the canned cider world, you can have some really sublime, I think, thoughtful, beautiful things where there's amazing farming behind it, and then you can have the complete other end. It's like an indie producer, but they're just buying, dessert apples that are not good enough for, the farmer's market, and making sort of just a whatever, a pedestrian cider
Mhm.
out of it. I don't
Mhm.
know. But again, I mean, we don't have to talk about this. I
No,
guess yeah.
let's talk about whatever you want. I mean, whatever comes up,
Well,
because
you
it
have
helps
much more
me.
interesting thoughts. You have many more interesting thoughts.
Well, no,
Let's do this.
but
Here, I
it's
have an idea.
yes. Okay.
Let's give a context. Who are you, and 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 tell us about Tilted Shed.
Oh my
Where is
god.
Tilted Shed located?
Oh, right, right. We jump into the middle of conversations, which I think is actually super fun and the best way to do it, because it's a more of
I
a
agree.
natural conversation. And
Yes.
I honestly am tired of talking about myself, or I don't find myself very interesting, but I have a lot of thoughts and I love to talk about this stuff. So no, I think it's like,
Well, I
these are
can.
questions I've always like, I, I, I ask myself all the time, like, why do I have to answer this question? Do the people in wine, And so that's why I like to ask you this question too. I think it's a really good conversation and dialogue, is what are the parallels there, you know? and then how can we learn from each other and how we talk to people and get them on board with different experiences. So I think it's actually helpful that we're having this conversation for me, because I definitely am coming at it from feeling like an underdog who's, just had to like work so hard to like have anybody pay attention to us, because I'm fighting not only against crap cider, right? Like
Right.
what do they say? A rising tide uh, lifts all
Lifts all
boats,
boats.
floats up, but
Yeah.
it doesn't always.
No. No.
You send garbage out there, it undermines the work we're doing, right?
Yeah.
In our category. And then, I see like the wine people, and I know it's a hard business, but like a lot of this hard work has already been done largely for you by previous generations. And we're still at a place where we're just trying to like get past the real, remedial questions about it. And I'm already ready to go 3 steps ahead past everybody else. And I acknowledge that. So I enjoy this. It's not pushback, but I enjoy you coming back with me and showing that like, even, I may, I may have the incorrect perception about what it's really like in wine as well, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe we're
Yeah.
all dealing with the same thing,
Yeah.
And that's kind of helpful to establish. So I appreciate that. I do.
Thank you. No, it is. I agree. It's good. But no, for real, it's well, I appreciate that as well. I appreciate any discussion that we had. We could probably talk for on many topics. Let me hear, and you're sick of talking about yourself, so I'm just going to do a little.
Okay. I mean,
Your
I
name is Ellen
can.
Cavalli.
Yes.
Your name is Ellen Cavalli.
Yes.
You are one of 2 people. The other is your spouse, I believe.
Yep. So my husband, Scott Heath. So I can real quickly. So we started Tilted Shed Cider Works. We're in Sonoma County. We started in 2011.
You have a little a nice little farm there that you're
We have a
living
little
on.
farm. Yeah, we live in Sebastopol, just outside Sebastopol. We have about 5.5 acres. We have about 100 different varieties of apples and peri pears planted. I have a seedling nursery that I've started. We have chickens, we have sheep, we have a dog, we have cats. We have a little garden. And, it's lovely and beautiful.
Here's a random question. I
Yes.
love that. And you make cider and at least 1 or 2 co-ferments.
So we make
with grapes.
Yes, we make so many things. So,
Okay.
oh my God, we probably make 25 different bottlings, and we do canned cider as well. So we do different formats. And we're one of those people who make really good cider in a can. Just because it's a different package doesn't mean you have to lower your expectations or your quality. That has nothing to do with it. They're just different packages, different ways of accessing the same beautiful stuff. So
much lower carbon footprint as well. Like a lot of benefits to cans, actually.
Yeah, right. But you can't do maybe you can, but pet nat, we love to do pet nat, method ancestral. We love to do method traditional, bottle conditioning, those sorts of things to our ciders as well. And those really work and we do disgorging and all of that. So you need to have bottles, and they also have more longevity in terms of the quality assurance. So a canned cider, really 6 to 9 months, but a bottle of cider, a couple of years. So, so there's other benefits, but blah, blah.
Okay.
But yeah, so we could talk about that too. I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things, Adam. I
have a quick random
Yes.
question for you.
Yeah.
How hard is it to raise and care for sheep?
It's not that hard. I mean, they're fine. They're not goats, is what I will say. So they're not goats. They don't get into everything. You can train them to be fenced in. We have baby doll sheep, so they're really tiny. They're plump. They're like walking barrels. They're like, hello. And we've had them. They're almost 10 years old, and yeah, they're pretty easy. We have pasture that we have, say, demarcated for them on our farm, so that we're really into, biodiversity is really important to us. Having wild spaces, having riparian habitats, leaving things alone, letting things reseed, naturalizing, that sort of thing is super important to us as well. So, it's
That's neat.
not a
Yeah.
manicured orchard at
You
all.
didn't
And
you didn't
calling
just
it a
plow. You
no.
didn't just plow bulldoze the whole 6 acres and
No,
plant
it was a
trees.
complete wasteland here. It had been pasture before with just a few trees and some big, beautiful oaks and other um, wild plum trees and all sorts of things. So it's actually a really lovely little spot.
And are the
And
trees big enough that you're putting the sheep out there that you can do some silvopasture?
yeah, we do. We
All
do.
right. Are they
Yeah.
is it integrated enough that they're taking care of all your sort of eating of the understory, or
They
do you
cannot possibly eat that much. So, what you live in California, so our climate, right? So we
right, so
have
half of the year they're not even
half of
gonna
the
get anything.
year it's desiccated. I mean, even
Right,
though we don't till and we try to cover crop and we try to mulch and do all the great things for soil tilth, we have these really dry, like really loamy, sandy, loamy Gold Ridge soils out here,
right.
which are great for drainage, but like their organic matter doesn't exist. So you have to add a lot of organic
Mm,
matter and trying to get out the invasive grasses and build up good cover crops and all that stuff. It's a lot of work, and we're so stretched thin. I have another job. I have a full-time job as well. And Scott, does all the cider making with our good friend David as our assistant, but like he's bottling everything by hand and all of that. So we're really
yeah.
stretched thin, and we can't be good farmers. I call us like we're members of the FFA, the Failed Farmers of America. We're not really good. So I don't call us orchardists, and I don't even really call us farmers because we suck at it. We could tell you what not
Yeah.
to do,
You know what,
but
but
going,
it's
yeah,
but it
but
but
going
it
back to
fits your lifestyle.
well,
It's
yeah,
sustainable in a way, like,
we're a little bit chaotic, we're
you're
a
not
little,
you're not doing any harm. It sounds like you're actually doing some good by the
we're
landscape, and
doing
you're
good by
doing
the
what
landscape.
fits, for 2 people to do who have busy lives, and, yeah, I mean, this is I aspire to that. I think that's good to hear, honestly. Like, you don't have to be this committed farmer to sort of farm, right? Like, I mean, do you feel that? Do you feel a pressure? Are you guilt-ridden that you're not doing better, or do you like that it fits in your life and that you've
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, I
there's
wish
a
we had
well,
done it better. No, I mean, what you're saying is resonating. That's why I'm sighing because, yeah, I wish we had done better. I mean, let me step back. Like, again, I'm not even talking about our background, and that's fine. But you should know, like, I come from a publishing background. So I was an editor for 25 years, and I'm really good at proofreading and writing and editing, um and we certainly are not um uh unlearned when it comes to agriculture. Like, we've been doing we started out with gardening, and then we sort of moved into very, very, very small scale farming after that, and we've read all the books and taken all the workshops and I've worked on a farm for a couple of harvest seasons. Um uh so we've done the work, but my background doesn't come from this, and Scott's a master printer of intaglio, so he actually comes from the art world, you know so Italio's etching, so fine art etchings, so he can edition these
right.
beautiful prints, and he's worked with amazing artists. um but this was sort of something that because we were, you know so disconnected from the earth, really. Like, I could make you a book and Scott could edition you a beautiful print, but like, could we make our own food? I don't know. We were living in New York when we
Right.
got together, and we just kind of missed having that connection. And so we started learning how to grow our own food and learning how to ferment our food. And we even grew wheat and learned we threshed it by hand and then milled it by hand and made our own
Made bread?
sourdough with it. Yeah, like
Yay, I love that.
we got there. We were those people, right?
Right.
We're giving away scobies all the time. We had kombucha all over the house. We had beer bubbling in one area and melomel in another. And so that all comes from just sort of like really wanting to reconnect to these lost
Yeah.
skills, to learning how to grow food, drink, learning how to prepare it. And it really relates to having a better connection to the earth and caring about the earth more, right?
Yeah.
So my point about all this ramble is that, yes,
You
even though
stopped growing weed.
we've no, we just, when you start doing this work, you realize like how much discipline you have to do it well, how much
Yeah.
knowledge is here, and
Yeah.
you can't be everything and do everything, and you have to be for you have to forgive
Sane.
yourself. You do,
Yeah.
like, because certain people are really. I mean, I always have so many projects, and I'm so driven, and I really want to do well by every. I want to do right and well by everything that I set out to do, and so there is a perfectionist tendency, and you have. I I have learned. It's been a real learning process, but I have learned to accept that things aren't going to go well, or you make mistakes and learn from them, or you don't always have to be good at something. And it's
Yeah.
okay to say that.
Yeah.
And having farming in air quotes here, growing our apples has been a very humbling experience, but also really liberating. So trees will die, the gophers will kill them, there's blight, we should have thinned that tree and now it's stunted for life, this one got a weird disease, we pruned that one wrong, you know what I mean, we didn't water it
Yeah.
enough because we were trying to conserve water, all those things that make you feel really, honestly, can I say shitty,
Yeah. You can say
um
anything.
things that make you feel shitty about yourself, that you failed. I'm just like, no, in what world was I supposed to know all of this? You know what I mean? I think the worst thing is to come at it without that humility and say, I know everything. It's like going into cider. If I started, when I started cider, I felt like, oh, I know everything about apples. I do not know everything about apples. The longer I do this, I know the difference between Arkansas Black and Kingston Black. And I do know a lot about apples and a lot about cider. But I'm just like, the longer you go, the more you realize you don't know a lot. And so
Yeah.
that's what it is, humbling. But like I
Yeah.
said, it is liberating, because why do I have those high expectations? So, no, our farm is kind of a mess. Things are decrepit. We've lost a lot of trees. We've made a lot of mistakes. And every once in a while, I have to twist that around, right? It's changing the narrative, right? We talked about
Yeah.
that earlier. It's like, what are the good things that came out of it? Well, I've learned a lot about, our soil
Yeah.
type. I've learned a lot about what apples will grow well here.
Hmm.
I'm have much more attuned to the seasons now, much more attuned to rainfall, much more attuned to all these different things. And maybe it's made me a better person in terms of wanting to be a steward of the environment, because of just like how variable and scary it can be. And also real deep and abiding respect for the people who are farming well here. So our apples here represent a very small fraction of our production. We do a
Right.
cider it's our farm reserve cider, it's our estate blend, and we do a barrel or two a year. That's it. Because we don't have a lot of yield in our orchard yet.
Right.
So everything else we get from a few organic orchardists here in Sonoma County. And then we have a place called the Lost Orchard. I know it's so mythical, but it really is. It's an abandoned cider orchard near the Russian River that we glean fruit from, and a couple of other places. And it just makes me really respect, Chad Frick, who's one of our main orchardists, or Laura Cheever, or Mike Meyer. Like, we are a first name basis with all these people. They're our friends. We support them. We pay them the most we can. Jake Mann, another great orchardist friend of ours. And, it makes me have so much more respect for what they're doing, because I know how hard this is now. And I
Yeah.
really feel, and maybe it's the same with wine, that I feel like I have much more respect, and I care even more deeply about the fruit, about these apples, about these varieties, because I now have firsthand knowledge of how hard it is to grow them well, to grow them sustainably, to grow and make it healthy. That people who can do that, year after year in large volumes, I'm so impressed by them. So it's really given me a lot. I'm more grateful for our growers than I was 10 years ago. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. And let's talk about some of those orchards. It sounds like you're using a lot of dry farmed orchards. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So dry.
And these
So
are pretty well established. I'm sure, like with, I think the thing, I want to put this out. I'm going to do a podcast on dry farming, but
uh-huh.
I think people people hear, that, oh, you're making, like, you're using all dry farmed vineyards or orchards or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's so wonderful, and it is such a great story, and it is wonderful for the environment that we can do that, even here in, drought ridden California. uh the reality is every one of these things is usually older, was established at a time when they watered it regularly with some sort of irrigation, whether it was flood irrigation or literally by hand irrigation. And then once they were established, or at some point maybe neglected, they just sort of figured it out without, having that regular water and just using the seasonal water. But these were, until they're established, dry farming is, in California at least, something that begins with irrigation. I think there's
Well,
very few places that, maybe in North, maybe I'm wrong.
well,
Yeah, I could be wrong.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know everything about the viticulture side, so I can't really speak to that. But for the apple growing side or orchards, I guess first of all, does everybody know what dry farming is? So I guess two things. Does everybody know what dry farming is? So let's put a pin on that because we might need to actually like define that. And then two, but right now I'll answer your question specifically about like cultivating something for dry farming because I don't want to get off track. I'm really working hard
Yes,
on concision and staying focused, Adam. It's tough for
you're
me.
doing
Oh
a great
my
job.
God, so tough. Anyway,
Making my
so
job easy.
I don't know. Good luck with editing. So yes, we source almost exclusively from old orchards. All of them are
Hmm.
organic, certified organic.
Hmm.
Um, and that's a requirement for us. It's very important to us that we
The
only work with
certification or the farming?
the farming practices are, and then
Yeah.
all of our orchardists do go through with certification. Now, here at home, we also follow organic practices, but like I don't have to prove anything to myself. And I am only making a couple barrels a year, and it's.
Yeah.
But it, following organic practice is very important to me. If someone didn't have the certification, that's fine. But a lot of times that certification sure helps those growers because they really can command a much higher price point on the open market. We can't buy everybody's fruit, but if they are certified organic, they have better opportunities, maybe selling to other processors, selling direct, to restaurants or selling to or markets and things like that. So certification, you could talk to an orchardist on why and why not they would go with this, but it does help them in the long run because they can command a higher price with certification here in Sonoma County than without it. So it does
Yeah.
behoove a grower to do that work.
Yeah.
And for us, though, we already pay top prices. We really, if we want to see orchards in attacked here, we know we have to pay a price. And we know that they're competing against high end wine, which can command 2, 3, 4 times as much per ton as they can get with apples. And so we want to do our best to keep them, in agriculture intact. And the way to do that is to pay them the most money we can. So that's a side
Yeah.
part. But going back to the orchards. So, yes. So, most of the orchards out here and the ones that we source from are at least 50 years old.
Yeah.
And they were planted to seedling rootstock. So rootstock, I mean, let's get a little nerdy, right? So rootstock is super important when you're deciding to grow grapes or you're deciding to grow apples as well. And I know with grapes, you're looking for phylloxera resistant. So you would probably, choose American, whatever rootstocks or different types of rootstocks for that or for um, different capabilities and characteristics. And for apples, it's the same thing. So they would be planting to what were called standard size rootstock or even seedling rootstock. And essentially that means that those rootstocks can dig in much deeper through the soil, have a greater drip line, longer tap roots, meaning they can withstand the pressures of drought much better. So when they're planted,
Right.
Back in the day, they'd probably be driving around on their tractor with, buckets of water and dropping it, pouring it by hand onto these new orchards as they're being established. But it wouldn't take a whole lot for them to then be established. And then once they are, then they generally can weather anything. And that's been the case. So, we have orchards that are 50, 100 years old here and are still producing, and they get no supplemental water, even in times of droughts as we've had here, even with these like sandy, loamy, gold-rich soils. Somehow those trees are able to hang in there. And so, as I say, they're still standing. And yeah,
And
so but like our orchard here, when we started it, we put it to semi-dwarf rootstock. The reason for that is because we wanted to do denser planting, so closer together, because they're smaller trees, and they fruit earlier, 4 to 7 years rather than 7 to 10 years. And we're like, dude, we need these apples. But they're not really. So we do drip irrigation, and I got to tell you, through these last couple of droughts, I've been feeling like the couple of years, feel like we're always in drought, right? Unless it's flooded, like in 2019, that I'm just like, ugh, should I be watering a crop that's only going to be like, it's only uses for alcohol? Like there is kind of an ethical question there. And it's something I wrestle with. And that's why our orchard isn't so great, guys. I mean, because like, we don't water it enough, because I don't, so if we were to do it again, ideally, if we could have afforded it, we would have bought an established old orchard, right? A standard orchard. We would have top worked, which means grafted onto those existing trees, the different varieties that we want to work with, and then not do any supplemental irrigation. And, this is a real cause for concern right now with the increasing volatility in our weather, with the greater extremes of our droughts. I grew up, I'm a California native, right? I grew up in the East Bay. I went through the droughts in the 70s. I remember being a little kid, but, my mom going, okay, you can only have this little bucket of water. I remember that. I grew up in drought. I understand what it's like to live this way, but nothing has prepared me for what I've seen this past year, with reservoirs drying, with wells drying, with the river running so low you can like tiptoe across it, with people having to cull their herds because there's not enough water for them. There's no hay. Bad news. And you're still going. I mean, at least we got rain recently, but I know down south you're really just not getting it. And so you have to really think, like, what is the price of survivability? The water wars are coming next. That's what it's all coming down to, and desalination isn't necessarily going to be the answer. And, reservoirs aren't going to be the answer if you don't have any runoff. So we really, as in all of agriculture, need to really think about it. I think, what should water be used for? Drinking? Bathing once in a while is a good idea. Like basic hygiene, right? Survivability. Food is super important. I believe the water should be used for food. I believe the food should be grown close by to you rather than trucked in from out of state or out of country. So I belong to a CSA, and that's where I get my vegetables. I believe that even if we're in a water scarce situation, if I've got that water, it should be going to food, and that food should be feeding people, and that food should be accessible. And that's what I do in my day job. I work for an organization called Farm Trails. So that's what the water should be used for. But should it be used for alcohol? Like that's a tough one. Like I see all these.
I love that you're asking that question.
I see all these vineyards out here, and there are people's
Yes.
wells that have gone dry. They don't have water. There's curtailments, but we're still watering vineyards. And then I water
Yeah.
my orchard and I'm like, why am I doing this? And part of it's like,
Yeah.
well, there's a lot of talk about like, well, if it's properly maintained, the vineyards and their irrigation system on drip is actually using only this amount of water, and people are, being very mindful about it because they want they everybody we're all in the same sinking boat. It's not even sinking. It can't sink when there's no water. We're all in the same desert right now. You know what I mean? And so I'm
Yeah.
not saying that the viticulturalists, that the people who run vineyards aren't um are don't care about the water scarcity issue, but so
No, of
much
course not.
money has
Yeah.
gone into setting those up. So much
Right.
money comes from it. It is our main driver of our economy here, is the wine industry. And so what do you do when you shut the water off to those vines and they die?
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a chicken in my house. Sorry, you
Oh,
might
well,
hear
that's all
the
right.
background.
Yep.
Um, so what do you do? And that's been a real source of contention right now. And I don't know if it's like that down in LA, maybe because your wine industry isn't quite as massive, right? There
No, yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
doesn't dictate a lot of your
Politics,
planning and
yeah.
politics and economy and all of that stuff. But this is a real tough question that we're all grappling with right now. And California is what, the number one producer of wine? And we are being hit so hard, and we are not going to get out of this drought. The whatever 20 inches we just got this past few weeks, I mean, that's not solving this problem at all. That's just
Right.
making it so that there's a little bit of moisture in the soil.
Yeah.
I don't
Yep.
know if we get out of this. I mean, this is what we're living with now. Is we're going to have 18 inches a year, and then we're going to have 60. It's going to flood, and then it's going to be fire, and that's what we're living with. And so we have to say, okay, what is the appropriate use for our water, and how can we now, with that whatever choice we make now, how do we make it so that we are not contributing to the problem? Either we're not adding to it, or we're, actively trying to make Sonoma County, in this case, survive. And that gets so anyway, I'm going off of my tangent, but that does speak to, using these old orchards. And I threw a freaking fit, man, on Instagram a couple of 3 months ago. I don't know when it was, a few months ago, where there's this one winemaker who used to be, I don't know, like a hedge fund manager. And he's like, I'm going to change career. If you're, maybe you're a hedge fund manager in your day job.
No, I'm not.
Okay. But like,
I would,
I'm going to
yeah.
become like this premium Pinot producer, winemaker. Sorry, I have to do my voice like that because it just was such a douchey thing. And he bought this, all of his wines are like $80-$90 a bottle, and he's full of shit, and all his, the way he talks about stuff, and calls himself basically the carbon messiah. Like, he bought, that he's doing all these things and he's going to save the world through wine. And he bought a property, a little orchard, not too, maybe 10 minutes from our house here.
Uh-huh.
Beautiful old orchard, organic, and then proceeded to bulldoze the shit out of those trees, and then was
Mm.
talking about how he was doing it for the good of the earth, and that what was coming next would be good in terms of carbon mitigation and regenerative agriculture. And I just lost it, because how do you justify bulldozing an orchard that's been there 50, 60, 70, 80 years, that is actively capturing carbon, that requires no supplemental irrigation, that hasn't had any chemical sort of negative, needs, that
Yep.
produces food for people and drink, right? So here's the thing. The good thing about all these orchards out here is they can feed a kid. They're not going to drink alcohol, right? They're not going to drink
Right.
fermented cider, but you can feed a kid who's hungry with these
Yeah.
apples, right? You could feed families with it. You can process it and have your applesauce. You can dry it. It's multi-purpose. These trees are feeding people. They're not just there for alcohol, and we can say that alcohol, while it seems pretty important to my life, that's a luxury. Okay, that's a leisure item. That's something that we don't absolutely need to have. But people need to eat, and these orchards are producing it, and they're giving all the time, and they're not taking anything from us. They're only giving. They're
Right.
not taking water. They're not putting in this poisons. They're taking in, the
They're giving
CO2 and giving
oxygen. Yeah.
oxygen. They're
Yeah.
giving food.
They're giving stability to the landscape
They
and the
are.
soil. Yeah.
Absolutely. What's teeming under that soil? What was the life like in that soil that hadn't been you know,
Disrupted
just
for
ripped
decades.
for
Yeah.
decades? Exactly. So how do you justify tearing that down, bulldozing it? And he was like, "Oh, look at my toy, this big ass bulldozer just to rip everything out. That's fossil
Yeah.
fuel intensive." How do you justify that and call yourself, doing
The
green? How do
carbon
you do this?
messiah.
We call them the carbon messiah. And how do you justify that? And then
Yeah.
what you put in vines that are going to require how much water right now in the middle
Yeah.
of
To
this severe
establish
drought
them.
to
Yeah.
establish them.
Yeah.
And
And
all the
ongoing. I
while,
mean,
talking about how this was good for the earth, and he is a steward of the earth.
insane.
And no, that's not it. So so you can try to greenwash all you want, but the
Yeah.
facts are the facts. That is a
Well, let's.
destructive, you know, it's a destructive agricultural practice, and we need to stop that,
Yeah.
and we
Well,
need to keep the things that are intact. And if you want to plant new vines, that's fine, but you do that so they don't need so much water, that they can weather climate, all the climate emergencies we go through, and that you're responsible about that, and you leave wildlife, and you work towards soil health. There's people doing really good work. I don't want to just like harp on this guy, but he represents the worst of it, and that's the ones that are
yeah.
getting rewarded with these $80-$90 bottles of cider. And he was in Wine Enthusiast magazine and all this stuff. They're the ones who are being lauded, but they're not the ones actually doing good work.
Yeah.
There are people doing good work. I'll hook you up with some of those people. You should interview them. But um, that's how I feel about
I
orchids
have.
and
I have.
grapes and
And
water.
I think I am interviewing one right now. um, no, that's great. No, yeah. I mean, down here, I think a really good example of that is like the Wonderful Company, who bought Justin and Paso Robles and does, Fiji water and palm, the palm thing, whatever. They basically, I don't know. It's a terrible company. It's like a corporate run thing that
Oh, I do
sort
know
of,
who you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, it does. When I say terrible, I mean, look, what do I know about them? But I know some of the practices. They basically bulldozed, virgin oak forest in Paso Robles.
Oh
They were the
my God.
and they sort of did it sneakily because they bought all this acreage, and then it was like somebody
Yeah.
didn't. It wasn't even discovered until somebody flew over with their plane and
Oh
saw like all this cleared
God.
land, and basically they are the cause of Paso Robles now having ordinances that prevent people from clearing more than, I forget, whatever percentage of your land of the natural trees that are
Right.
there when you
But
buy a new property.
but what's the problem
It was
here? So even if they violated the law, which I'm sure they knew they were going to, that they
I
did.
don't think there was a law at that time.
Well,
That's
I
the
see
problem.
there's
They violated the natural law.
so there are some companies that have done the same thing out here. And
Yeah.
they build that into the cost of doing business. They're well
Yeah.
capitalized, and they
Yeah.
get they get a fine for $25,000. Do you think they care? No, they don't
Yeah.
care. So they bulldoze a riparian zone and pay the fine after, going through the courts and making the county, fight them on it. So, a lot of that stuff, I mean, that's we have it's a huge problem even out here. It has been. There's a lot of ordinances that have gone into place to try to prevent that, and that's great. But a lot of these companies, because they're so well funded, they build that into the cost of doing business. They don't care about the fines. What's not going to happen is that they're It's not like their business license is going to be revoked. It's not like they're going to be like, nope, you have to shut down. You don't get to do business. They still get to do business.
Yeah.
Nestle still gets to take water out of the ground and resell it. I mean, like, all these companies get to be really extractive and still allowed to continue doing their work. They don't get shut down.
Yeah.
So, if you really want to teach a lesson to people, you don't let them do it. And then if they do it, then you shut them down. You don't give them a
Right.
$10,000 fine or say you're bad. Give them a little sticker on their window saying naughty. You shut them down. But that's not how we do things, right? Because the
No.
money talks. If they can afford that fine, they can afford a lot. So,
Yeah.
follow that money. But it's a real shame because you can't grow. I mean, you can't get those oak forests back, in quite the same way. It's
Yeah.
the damage
I
has
mean,
been
no
done to the
way.
land, and yet they probably have a really good marketing department that's going to represent their product
Yeah.
as
I mean,
natural and healthy.
their company is called Wonderful.
Yeah.
It must be true.
Well, no one would lie. My company's called Tilted Shed, and our shed really is tilted. So truth in advertising. I
um,
know.
all right, let's quickly. First of all, one of the pins that I want to put in is the question that you're asking yourself when you water that orchard there. I think I think it's such an important question to ask. I don't think enough people in our industry in California are asking that. We're all talking about how to remove freaking smoke taint from our wine, and I think we should be talking about removing fruit that needs to be irrigated from the landscape, not you know what I mean? Like,
I
this is a
do.
big
Yeah.
thing. Like maybe it's not the, let's like refocus where we're putting our attention. Like, if we're, yeah, like you said, we're literally turning off the tap to certain agricultural sectors that get, their water from the river up north.
Yeah.
And if we're doing that and we're watering, you know, these things that really don't do well without being watered in this climate, then maybe we need to look at some things that we can eat and drink that do well in this climate, because there are those. I mean, I don't think, like we're making some wine from prickly pear because of
Hmm.
for that very reason, just to draw attention to that. Like,
Yes.
hey,
Neat.
maybe we need to start
Mhm.
thinking about like what has been going on for thousands of years in north central Mexico and southern Texas with indigenous cultures who have lived in desert landscapes, because that's where we're headed, a desert landscape. It's not Mediterranean anymore.
It isn't.
and
Mhm.
and let's start wrapping our heads around a different way to do agriculture, not something that requires us to use up all the water to do
Exactly.
this, for
And
things that really aren't adapted to a desert.
you can do it. I mean,
You can.
you can, farm, you can cultivate and farm grapes. What are they, was it, ah, God, I wish I could tell. Is it the Canary Islands somewhere where they're so dry that they make those little wells sort of around the vines? I mean, there's so many different types of methods
Yeah, yeah.
that you can look at, like, what different
Yeah,
areas have
vines.
done. Or
Well, and it's
even here,
also,
there's lots of old vine Zinfandel and things like that
yeah,
they're
absolutely.
dry farmed, and I
Absolutely,
understand
yeah.
maybe once in a while they need a little bit of water. You know,
Right.
maybe, okay, we're in a real crisis, they need a little bit of water. That's fine.
No.
You know what I mean? That's fine a little bit, but like when it's an IV drip, it can't survive without it, then we got problems. And I was
Well, and
driving,
that's
yeah.
maybe sorry, that just to put a caveat on what I had said about different fruits. I mean, maybe we use the same fruits, but we don't have the same yield expectations anymore. Like, maybe it's not a 3 tons per acre scenario anymore. Maybe it's a half ton per acre
Yeah,
scenario.
well, I mean, but again, California, this is number
Right. I
one
mean,
wine region in the US, and this is a main driver of our economy. And so this all, I think it's not just like, should vineyards, or in our case, there's, you know, uh, non-standard orchards be irrigated because they're used for alcohol. It's not just that question.
right.
But it's also, what are we building our economies on? What are we building our communities on? And a lot of times, again, it's become this extractive thing where we're we're trying to get all this stuff from the earth so that we can package it and sell it to other people way far away,
And
right?
line our pockets with
And
gold,
then
right?
make as much money as possible and have the biggest margins as possible, and then just keep that going. Ultimately, what should we really be going for is something that, as a closed loop. So like, I'm not taking more water than I'm putting back in through, various regenerative agricultural means or rainwater catchment or groundwater injection, those sorts of things. I'm trying to keep it as close to here as possible. I'm paying my farmers as much as possible. I'm paying my workers as much as possible. And the people who buy my products are paying as much as possible so that we can all stay within this like sustainable, and sustainable is a stupid word, but I mean that in the
Yeah.
like actual literal sense. Like, it's something that we can continue doing
Right.
without one of us in that circle suffering so much.
Yeah.
So I don't
Well,
know. I mean, up here it's also cost. So why
yes,
why
of
are you
course.
trying to
Yeah.
get so much? Why are you trying to get so much acreage or so much tonnage per acre?
It's
Is
because,
because it's freaking expensive up here. It's
yeah.
outrageous how much it costs to live here, how much land costs, how much all of it costs. And
Well, you
so,
just did a recent blog post about that. That was your most recent blog post about equity and the cost of real estate in Sonoma County. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I
well,
think you have some really important thoughts about it, or at least you've brought up
yeah.
some really. I think it's just important to underline that and to think about that as we're moving in the
Yes.
right
Well, I
direction,
mean,
hopefully.
yeah, exact. So, well, I brought that up in terms. So I have a friend who was a black farmer, and she and her wife have been trying for so long to buy just a couple of acres here so that they could have their own farm. And she just they couldn't afford it. It's so expensive here. It's so expensive. People were, especially during the pandemic, was really when it had reached its
Oh
peak,
yeah,
because what was happening is people were coming from the Bay Area. They were buying second homes, third homes, their weekend homes. It's, they no longer had to go into the office to their whatever Google or Tesla or whatever, Twitter office space or wherever, Salesforce, wherever they were making a lot of money. They no longer had to go into the office. So they're like, well, we can work from anywhere. So let's go buy a cute little property up in Sonoma County. So they could pay all cash. They can outbid everybody because they are well monetized. They're making these like really high end Bay Area salaries and coming up here. And this is not new. I mean, this has been happening for a long time, but it kind of
right,
just reached a zenith during the pandemic. It was shocking. It was just like astronomical increases in property values, and my friend's just like, I can't even, like, I want to stay here. you know, we want to live here. This is where we want to be, but we can't afford it. So she started looking around, and it got me to learning a lot more about land tenure and racial equity, or the lack thereof, in agriculture in California. So sort of that, that her, what she was going through just really crystallized a lot of the problems I see here. And one is a lot of, and myself included, generational wealth, right? So the people who can
right. I
afford anything here generally have some generational wealth. What do we mean by that? It means that your parents or your grandparents, had
owned
property,
real
had
estate.
money, they
Yeah,
owned real estate, and they were able to take that and convert it to more real estate or to more money. And that's, I willingly admit, the only reason Scott and I were able to afford this place, which by the way was completely run down, and we got it for under $400,000, which is a good value, even
right,
though the house was unlivable and we had to live in a trailer for a while. But my point being that the reason we were able to do that is because Scott's parents and his grandpa died. They had all had their own homes that they owned, and those homes were, when they passed, they were sold, and he and his two siblings inherited some money. That's
right,
generational wealth.
right.
Now, that's how a lot of people do it. Now, if you are a black person whose family, you come from a family that was enslaved, You're, so you had no generation. You didn't get to come over here and build wealth. The wealth was extracted from you. It was
Right.
stolen from you. Then you are so-called emancipated, but then you're kept, basically in almost bondage through Jim Crow laws, through all these terrible sundowner laws, through minimum wage. I mean, what is minimum wage doing? The incarceration, what is all of that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you build generational wealth when every single system in our society is meant to keep you down? And every
Right.
single system is meant to help white people like me go up. So that's
Right.
what it started, it was a real revelation to me, because I always considered myself kind of like middle class. I didn't have much money growing up. There was no real generational wealth on my side. Let me be clear about that. And I'm not saying Scott's family was like loaded and rich, but they came from a place where they were able to buy their own home. And then
Right.
you're able to start the succession of it. And so we benefited from that. And not many people who, don't have that don't. So, and then that income inequality and the systemic prejudices and the imbalances of the policies that are in play, from the redlining, from the USDA, I mean, all these things, all these programs historically, and even to this day, have been built to continue creating, this inequality. How do you reverse that? And so what we have here is an economy in Sonoma County that's based upon wine, which is a luxury good, which is, a large amount of the workforce are immigrants and brown people, right? Who may be undocumented or not, and so maybe don't benefit all the time from the wealth that's associated with that product. We have the price of property for people who want to get out from under there and start their own thing astronomically high, due to the tech, due to the hedge funds, finance, and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So how do you rectify that? You can't have a community that stays intact when only the rich people can have farms for other rich people.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you
You
can
can't
only
do
rich
that.
people can afford to get the land, and then the products that they're creating can only be afforded by rich people. Yeah.
So
It's
how do you continue living? How does your
yeah.
place continue going, like perpetuate, if you can only be serving this really, top echelon of the economic sphere? You can't. And so, I brought it up in that post, which isn't really like, it's a really hard thing to talk about. I'm not a land use or, policy expert or anything like that. But, there was a report by USDA, or no, I'm sorry, CDFA, California. It's called the Farmer Equity Report, released in 2020, based upon information gathered up to 2017. And I believe there was like 124,000 people who identified as farmers in the state, and only 429 of them were Black. Not 429,000, 429 people, Black.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's 0.3% of the farmers. And so, maybe we talk about reparations. You know what I mean? Like, maybe we talk about repatriation for the indigenous peoples. Maybe we really make that part of our land use policy.
Yeah.
Because then what you're going to do is you're going to be able to keep people from leaving, so we don't have many Black people here to begin with. And then if they don't have not, as much generational wealth to be able to sustain this lifestyle as some of people who maybe who are, white, let's be honest, that's how it works, then they're going to leave. And then what am I going to be left here with for my son?
Yeah.
So, it's a real hard thing to grapple with. It's something I, as like this little tiny cider producer, can't totally change, but it's something that I have talked about publicly as Tilted Shed. We actually raised money for our friend. We made a special cider and we gave her 10% of all the profits from that to help fund her. She's not a nonprofit. She's just a person who I believe deserved to have a farm, because I wanted to have her, I wanted to keep her here. And how can we do it? She ended up moving to Georgia. She couldn't afford it here. So, so we lost, now we have 428 Black people here. So, I think, I guess this sort of goes into another topic, and sometime you have to cut me off, Adam, but it's like, what do you do when you have a platform? So I make cider. All I'm doing is making cider, co-ferments. I'm making alcohol that makes people feel happy. It tastes good.
Yep.
It's interesting. It looks cool. But I'm not really like saving the world. But if you have this ability to talk about these issues that come up and that you are either part of the problem, part of the solution, right? Then I think we have a duty and an obligation to talk about these things. We don't have to talk about them in every Instagram post or every time we talk to people, but I think we should always bring it up. And I think that if we divorce ourselves from environmental justice, from social justice, racial justice, from very thorny issues that are uncomfortable, but if you act like those things aren't happening and I am just making ooh la la some like crispy cider, then you're also being an extractive. You're not really being community minded. These are my neighbors here. I want people to I want there to be, lots of diversity here. I want there to be a place of equity and inclusion, real equity, inclusion, and real representation. And I want people to stay here. And I want my son to grow up with people from all different cultures and religions and colors and backgrounds. Because that's going to make him a better person, and that's going to make this a better world. It really is. Yeah. So, and maybe we all care deeper about each other, and maybe we all end up caring more about our world. So, I feel like that's something I brought up. It was very, it was quite the thing to do back in the George Floyd protests, to talk about it and then to drop it. And it's not like I bring it up at all times, but I really do believe to use the platform I have in fighting for and supporting people who may be, who may need it. We did a fundraiser for Trans Lifeline, to support trans people. They're under attack all the time. And so, or to talk about land equity uses, to talk about, our climate emergency. I know I don't want to be a downer all the time, but your choices matter. Like who you support and what products you buy, even if you want to chill out and forget the world's problems with a cider, you should at least feel good knowing that you supported a company that actually is working toward fixing those problems that are causing you to want to check out for a while.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Well said. Very well said. And with that, let's talk about your ciders. What do you got available that we can try?
Oh God. When is this
okay,
airing?
well, first of all, oh, good point. Well, maybe in a week or two.
Okay.
Let's say, how do people find your ciders, first of all?
Well,
what's your website?
My website, tiltedshed.com. Yes.
Tilted Shed.
Tiltedshed.com. Okay. And there is a Tilted Shed. That wasn't a joke when I said there is. Yeah, there is. There's a Tilted Shed. That's
I think I've seen it on your Instagram.
Yeah, it's there. It's there. And my Instagram's where I'm mostly so I run that account, and that's where I'm the most active. So follow me there. Okay. We can.
What's that? At what?
Just Tilted Shed. It's
perfect.
Pretty easy.
Nice.
Our ciders. So we do ciders and co-ferments. We release stuff 3 or 4 times a year. We do up to 25 different bottlings. I'm waiting on the labels, and they're arriving any day now for our winter release, and that's going to be some cool stuff. Like a single variety Arkansas Black, a Arkansas black cider that's aged in our own brand apple brandy barrel. We have our method traditional Jonathan, so it's a single variety champagne method, hand riddled, hand disgorged. We also have our estate cider, our 2019 vintage that we're releasing. So it's some really good stuff. We also have the co-ferments. So that one's a Carignan Jonathan co-ferment that's coming out, which is lovely. And then we do a lot of other stuff. And we also have a Pommeau that we're releasing. So we do distillation projects with our neighbors, and we have a lot of stuff that we do. And everything is pretty small. I'm talking between 10 to 50 cases. That's about it in kegs. So you're not going to go to Ralph's. You're not going to go to a supermarket and find our stuff. And I don't earlier on, we were sort of the mindset, like fewer, products, fewer SKUs or whatever. And, try to make more of it and try to really get out in distribution. And we've gone through a few distribution partnerships and nothing worked out for us because we're just not cut out for that kind of life, like that kind of demographic or anything like that. Nor am I you hear me talking now. Imagine me going to an account. I'm not very good at schmoozing. I'm terrible at it. So you don't want me out there anyway.
Let me ask you a quick ignorant question.
Okay.
What's the difference between Pommeau and apple brandy?
Oh, I would love to answer that question. So Pommeau is made with apple brandy. So what you do is you take, and it originated, or it's most famous in France, in Normandy. Is it
like port? Is it like where you arrest the fermentation by adding
kind of, yeah.
brandy?
So you take, it's usually the formula is 1/3 brandy, or in France you use Calvados, and then you blend in fresh pressed juice, so about a 2/3 of that, and then you age it in barrel, and it's delicious. And it has
amazing.
It's super rich. It'll usually about 18% ABV. So yes, so the alcohol arrests fermentation. There's no fermentation, right? So, it has
sweet a little bit.
Sweet, but it'll have lovely toffee notes to it, or roasted pecan notes to it, and things like that. So it's extraordinary. I love it.
Yeah, the ones I've had have been
so good. So we make several types, and we do one with roasted acorns. So we leach the acorns, crack them, roast them, then infuse it in the brandy over it, and then take that infused brandy and then blend it in with juice. We do a Lost Orchard Pommeau, which is using this abandoned cider orchard and using a lot of the bitter, sweet and bitter sharp apples that goes into it. So it's very
sweet, but it has some substance.
It's very much. It's very complex still, even so. Lovely. Even it being sweet, we do.
And do the acorns? Do you gather them? Where do you get the acorns?
We do. Yeah, we do.
Nice.
Yeah, so we just get them, locally. Usually, you use the black oak. There's live oak. There's black oak. There's pin oak. Yeah. I think this last time we used black oak. So we do that. We also do a pink peppercorn Pommeau. So we don't do a whole lot of. I usually don't like to add botanicals to our ciders because. One of my favorite ciders is Wixon, and it, if you just, it's delicious out of hand. It's a delicious little crabapple, a lot of lemon meringue notes. And when it ferments out, it retains that, but it has some nice, really sort of wild herbal qualities too. And I'm just if I added, rosemary to it, or I don't know, some botanical to it, the fact is it's unnecessary because a lot of these apples, when they ferment, they already have a lot of those notes to it. So I hate to mess with it. But when we do our Pommeau projects, I think it's actually really lovely to do some botanicals with it because you're using it in the base of the brandy, right? And so that brandy, that distillate, that alcohol, that spirit kind of, it's a lot of really interesting amari and things like that. Those botanicals really make it sing. So we like to use the botanicals in our Pommeau. So we do that. And, I have a special little project. I also as much as I can, as, as I have time for, I go out and I like glean for fruit. So we harvest wild native elderberry like along the waysides, and we co-ferment with that. I harvest a lot of wild grapes as well, and I co-ferment with that. I call that my
Mm.
viniferal.
That's
Everything,
lovely.
yeah. And so
Did you trademark that one?
it's
I noticed
trademark
some of your
now.
nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, I mean, just by usage, I know trademark law a
Yeah.
little bit.
I mean, I noticed you guys have some trademarks on some of your more
Yeah, well,
clever.
those get a little bit trademarking. Naming is such a
Yeah.
hard thing.
Yeah.
But we also love, like you're talking about, like the prickly pear. There are wild native elderberries out here and they're exquisite, and that's super cool. We leave a lot for the
Yeah.
birds. I used to apprentice or study with an herbalist, and so I know a little bit about herbalism and wild crafting and the way you don't take all from nature, right? You leave it for the birds, you leave
Right.
it for the critters. I take my little part, I leave the rest for you. So there's always responsible foraging that goes on, but I'm always looking for
Right.
like little seedling apples that are popping up, or weird, you know, seedling pears on somebody's property, and they're like, "Do you want them?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be right over and I'll get them." Weird little crab apples in an industrial area, all that sort of stuff. So I love to go in and sort of glean for foraged or feral fruit, and work with that, because I think of ourselves as kind of food shed ferments. So as you were saying, these things are growing here. They're doing well. They naturalized there. They've adapted to being here. They don't require any work on my part except for, asking the plant if I could have some of its fruit and then fermenting with it. So I love to do that. Um, but yeah, we release probably like 25 different bottlings as well as can ciders and co-ferments of the year. So at any given time, you're going to find something different and new. And then as far as finding it outside of our cidery or off of our, not on our online store or in our club, which is actually full. We have a wait list on that. Um, we just have a handful of accounts that we work with locally. They're super great. And we like that. I've stopped chasing accounts. I'm not trying to dominate, the shelves anywhere. If you want our stuff, that's great. If you don't, that's fine. Um, like we really
Yeah.
are mostly direct to consumer. And so we were really shockingly
I
well
love that.
situated during the pandemic when everybody, all these bars and restaurants and places had to
When
close. We were like,
you
that's
have a
fine, just get it from us.
and people can come and taste on Saturdays, is that right? At
Yeah,
the
and
cidery.
we've started opening on Friday afternoons too. So it's at our cidery. We are
Oh,
in a warehouse district, and so it's not going to be on a bucolic grounds, but we're in a nice little area. We're in it's an industrial area in
there'll be no
Windsor,
sheep
which
nuzzling at the
but there's
cidery.
pictures of sheep. Don't worry, I
There you
made it look
go.
really cute inside. But we're next to several wineries, a distillery, and a little brewery. A brewery and also a beer tap room. And we just make the most of it. We're just like a bunch of small, little family run enterprises that all have other jobs. We all have other jobs, and we're doing our projects here because we love it so much, and we help each other out. And it's actually a really nice, we call it ourselves Artisan Alley, but it's just a really nice little vibe. And yeah, and if you come to visit us, it's like coming to our living room, but like cuter and cleaner and no cats. It's just, we try to make it really welcoming. And our tasting room host, David, is super nice, and he'll always make you laugh. And we just, there's no airs about it. We don't try to make people feel uncomfortable if they've never had cider before. Um, or if you know a lot about cider, we're willing to geek out with you, but like we just want you to have fun, have a good time, learn a few things, maybe walk off with a few bottles, share them with somebody else, have them come and hang out with you next time, and make it a real convivial place. So yeah, we welcome everybody to
Love it.
come. It's good. Oh, and
I
we're
love it.
dog
Well,
friendly and all that stuff. Kid
great.
friendly, yeah.
Perfect. I love that. I love kid friendly too. More. We should mix kids and alcohol more often.
That's the only way I got through my early parenthood. Are you kidding? Oh my God.
I mean that in the best way. I hope. Thank you so much, Ellen. I really appreciate this. It's been really just a treat to talk to you, and you're such a great spokesperson for so many great ideas. We should wrap this up, but I can't say thank you enough for being willing to do this. And
Oh, well, thank you too.
a
It was really
real treat.
fun. And everybody missed our earlier conversations about chickens and cats and pets and all that stuff. And, that was fun too. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And I appreciate you giving me time and space to talk.
Hey, of course.